Here we are again. We've scoured all of the comments and only the best made it to this episode of Ask the Captain. Here we go with number one. All right, we've got Katrina 3032. How do pilots handle having a bad day? That's a good question, actually. Pilots are human beings like everybody else, and they have good days and bad days, and good hair days and bad hair days, and in my case, no hair days. We're encouraged to call in sick if you're not ready to fly. And so that's a pretty broad category. Now, has there been pressure over the years to show up for work? And yeah, absolutely, right? Every employer wants all their employees to show up for work. But we have sick days like everybody else. I'm encouraged to use them. In fact, I gather them up over a number of years. I think they cap out at like 1,000 hours altogether. So if I'm having emotional issues or there's something going on that's just extremely stressful and I don't feel like my head's in the game and I should go flying, then yeah, I should call in sick and go get that straightened out. And then the next layer beyond that is to reach out and get help. At my airline, there's a thing called Project Wingman for people that need to get some counseling and go a little bit deeper with those things. But there are systems, at least in the US, in place for pilots to get help if they're having a bad day or worse. Great question. All right. Trabine8 writes, what has been the most poop scariest moment of your career? A real in your pants moment. Well, at the airlines, there really haven't been very many. I've mentioned two before on this channel from my Navy days. And the first one was I landed in really bad weather one night, fully loaded airplane, bombs on the wings. We had come in heavy, and we landed on the runway. And because of all the water on the runway, we hydroplaned, and it took the entire length of the runway. It's like a 10,000 foot runway. And we stopped the airplane with 1 foot remaining. And so when you see the end of the runway coming up and the airplane simply is not slowing down and not stopping, that's your poop moment. Okay. But it all turned out okay. I remember sitting there for a little bit at the end of the runway. The engines were turning and there was a lot of silence up in the cockpit because we all realized what just happened. And I tried to get up out of my seat later on and my knees were knocking so bad because of the adrenaline let down. I couldn't stand up. So that's the real moment, but that's, good question. All right. Hawkeye 454 writes, would there ever be a time 2 captains are selected to fly instead of 1 captain and 1 first officer? How would delegation of authority work? No, there's never a time where that is the case. They always match a captain with a first officer. There's a crew scheduling down in, at least at my company, coordinates all of that. And now there are times where 2 captains can fly together. That would be a check ride, where a check pilot would be with the captain. The check pilot is the one that signs for the airplane, that has the ultimate authority over the flight. So randomly, I will get a check ride, and another captain will show up and say, hey, I'm giving you a check ride today. That's the only time. There's one more caveat to that, and we have a long-range flight at my airline that goes from New York all the way to Delhi, and they actually put a second captain on that flight. So there's the main captain, the one that signs for the flight, and then there's a relief captain. So there's actually 2 first officers and 2 captains. It's a legality. But whenever the other captain is in the seat, that captain is in charge while I'm on my break, if that makes sense to you. Next is Dan Bree Fogel 4886. We often hear the term redundancy when it comes to the design of aircraft. Can you explain what this means in simple terms? Yes. Every system we have on the plane, there's at least 2 of them. There's 2 pilots, there's 2 autopilots, there's 2 radios. The instrument landing systems, there's 2 or more of those. We have 2 or more computers on the airplane. This came up in the MAX crashes, and we're about to do a video kind of going over what caused the MAX crashes. And when the MAX crashes happened, they put a system in called MCAS. MCAS, they didn't let the pilots know about it. They didn't put it in the operating manuals, and MCAS relied on one simple input. That is just simply not done. Anything that requires an input, there's always a backup in case that one input should fail or be unreliable so that they can compare the 2. The redundancy is hugely important. It's one of the principles of how you design aircraft, and Boeing messed that up. They've since fixed it, and hopefully they never go back and do that again. All right. So that's good. That's where redundancy comes in. All right. I've got Albert Martz Z9F. As a certified scuba diver, we were taught to always trust the direction of your bubbles. I bet you were. They always go up. Okay, good. Regardless of what your inner ear is telling you, is this similar to pilots trusting their instruments? Yes, it's absolutely the same. Now, of course, I can't blow bubbles and see which way is up, but I can look at my instruments and they'll tell me, we always say keep the blue side up. So the blue side of my attitude gyro is the sky. The brown side is the dirt. So I always want to keep the blue side on the top. And let's say my inner ear is messing with me and I feel like I'm turning to the right, but the airplane tells me I'm turning to the left. I have to believe that instrument in front of me, and I have to tell my own brain, disregard how you feel and go with that. So I'm going to turn the airplane back to the right to level the wings, even though my brain is telling me if you do that, boy, you're just going to drop out. Nope. It's really, really hard to do. There's been a couple of 3 occasions over the years where I've needed to do that, but it's one of the things early on in your pilot training where they teach you absolutely trust your instruments. The instruments are not going to lie to you, very much like the bubbles, right? All right, good question. All right, the next question is Dean McCormick, 8070. Can an instrument fail and give you wrong information, but all the instruments are never going to conspire to give you the same wrong information, right? That's correct. They aren't. In fact, there's, talk about redundancy. There's a lot of redundancy in our instrumentation. The captain has instruments, the FO has instruments, and then there's a center console with standby instruments. Each of those instruments are powered separately. All right, so he's got his own set of power. I got mine own. And the third in the middle are separated from all of the other 2 as well. So having said that, it's really kind of not probable or even likely that even one of them is going to go out, much less 2 or all 3. Have there been instances where an airplane lost all electricity? Yeah, I suppose there have been. Well, what have you got to back that up? Well, you can look outside for one thing. Hopefully you're not IMC because you've got a great big horizon out in front of you, so you can tell which way is up or down. And then on top of that, you've got a wet compass. And the wet compass is a little globe that sits up right about here in my cockpit. And it works without electricity. So I can always tell what direction I'm going in. So all of those things are backups and redundancy. But I don't think it wouldn't all fail at the same time. Good question. All right, Aaron Murphy, 7772. I've had a spatial disorientation more than once between sloping clouds layers and in otherwise unlimited visibility. This can be as dangerous as pure IMC without proper training. Can you explain this? Yeah, it absolutely can be dangerous. There are times where your inner ear will mess with you for a variety of different reasons. It'll make you think you're going one way when you're actually going the other, or you can be looking at something that you think is level, but it's really not. And because you don't have any visual references, especially with clouds. Do you ever wonder why, if you're in the back of the airplane and you're looking out the window, you can't tell how fast you're going? You think you're going fast. I'm telling you, you're going about 500 miles an hour. If we were right over the ground, if we were at 100 feet above the ground, you'd be holding on for dear life and screaming bloody murder. Slow down, right? Because you would have visual references in your brain of buildings, cars, people, and so forth. And you'd get an idea of how fast you're going. The clouds, you don't know how big they are. And so your brain kind of messes with you a little bit on that. So it's easy to get disoriented, even if you're not IMC, even if you're in visual conditions. So good question. All right, Kevin Digo, 22. Years ago, I was on a corporate flight in a King Air flying in the clouds. I was absolutely certain we were flying straight and level. But when I looked up into the cockpit, I saw on the instruments that we were actually in a banked turn. Why does this happen? Well, it happens for the same reasons I just explained. Your inner ear can mess with you. If you do this, if I were to sit in the cockpit and put my head down like that and just leave it down and then snap it up real fast, it takes a minute for your inner ear to reorient. So you can get yourself kind of off kilter that way. You might have been sitting, let's say you're in a window seat and you're kind of sleeping for a little bit. Well, your head gets used to being here. That's now equilibrium for you. And if you sit up too quickly, you're going to feel like you're still over here. So it takes a couple of seconds, especially if you've got any sort of congestion, it takes even longer. So good on you to take a look up front, but yeah, that's what was going on. All right, we've got JW8292. It amazes me when so many qualified pilots can't manage to hold a basic attitude when they find themselves in IMC. And it's appalling when a commercial pilot can't. Why? I don't know who you've been watching or who you've been flying with. I don't really share your opinion on that. I don't know many pilots that can't hold a basic attitude. Now, when you're first learning, yeah, there's some challenges with that. You have to learn how to trim the airplane up, and you have to concentrate on the right things to get the airplane nice and straight and level. But that comes rather quickly. After a while, that becomes just kind of like second nature. I'm not sure. Appalling commercial pilots. Yeah. I'd like to see your study group here for that one. All right, Ari Morris at 7816. How do you land if your landing gear fails? How dangerous is it? Well, very dangerous. Safer on the runway or on a softer surface like grass? And would you prefer front wheel only, back wheels only, or none if you had the option? Wow, that's a very well thought out question. I hadn't really thought through it that much, but thinking about it now, I would say this. It's very dangerous if your landing gear doesn't come down, right? For obvious reasons, especially if one or the other doesn't come down. What would I prefer? I wouldn't prefer to land on grass. You would think that grass is soft and it might be to your feet, but not to an airplane coming down. An airplane coming down is going to be a lot of weight. It's going to be a lot of momentum, and it's going to dig in, and that's going to cause the airplane to twist and do a lot of other things that I don't want it to do. So I'm not going to land on grass. I'm going to want to land on the hardest surface I can. Now, that might be counterintuitive because you're thinking, well, wait a minute, why do we want to do that? If I bring the airplane in right and smoothly enough, I can still do that with no landing gear. Then I'm going to skid. What they'll do is they'll go out and they'll foam the runway if you have no landing gear. And in fact, my preference would be all the gear up. So I've got as smooth a bottom as I possibly can on the airplane. And if I can go to an airport where they can foam the runway, it's pretty cool if you've ever seen it. They'll put a bunch of foam out for like the first 3,000 feet. And when you touch down in that, you just kind of slide on that foam. But the airplane now weighs in and you just kind of come slowly to a stop. There's lots of sparks, but the foam is also a fire agent that puts out any sort of potential flames or fire. And I've seen airplanes just come to a rest. They kind of do like that, and they stop. That's my thoughts on that. Gear all the way up in a foamed runway. Okay, we got D. Tilla. I saw an Airbus 330-343 depart Manchester, UK for Atlanta, and the landing gear did not retract for the entire time I could see the aircraft. What would cause this? Well, there are various things that can go wrong with an airplane that cause the gear not to come up. The most embarrassing one is the gear pins are still installed. So on the ground, there are places in each one of my gear, the front and the back, where you can put a pin in where the gear won't come up. Why would you want to do that? In case they need to do maintenance on an airplane. So let's say they're going to jack up the airplane for one reason or another. They don't want somebody inadvertently grabbing a handle in the cockpit and raising the gear while it's on the ground. So when they're doing maintenance in the hangar, they'll put the pins in. When they come back to the gate, they pull the pins out. And in fact, I look at the pins, I observe them before I take off, and the nose pin that's in the airplane, when we push back, gets pulled out. The lineman walks in front of the airplane. He holds up the pin. I salute. He salutes. We wave. I see the pin. And I say to my co-pilot, I got the pin. I got the salute. So I know that all my pins are removed from the aircraft. That could have been one. It could have been just a malfunction in the system in the way it works. It's a mechanical system at first. It's got a handle that you raise. Something could have broken in the handle. Maybe some of the linkage was bad. For whatever reason, it's better if the gear stays down than the gear comes up and doesn't come back down. So I'm okay with the gear staying down because I'm just going to turn back around to Manchester probably and land that airplane. But that's a good question. All right, Ben Courts 5053. Can you talk about why there are so many unruly passengers and what exactly happens from the pilot's standpoint? Who's responsible for the diversion? I don't know who's responsible for the diversion. My guess is the airline is probably going to try to charge the passenger for it, especially if they're out of line, but it goes kind of through the court system. So from a pilot's perspective, this is one of the most annoying things because I'll get word that there's somebody in the back that's out of control. And there are actually various levels that we evaluate that at. I'm not going to tell you what they are, but there's various levels. And if somebody is just being uncooperative, you try to work with them as much as you can, try to get to the bottom of what's going on. But if they go beyond uncooperative and they start to get kind of agitated, right up to that level, that's when I start to get on the radio and I start talking to our dispatcher, and I also start talking to the authorities on the other end, because if I have to divert someplace and let this passenger off, and just a little Captain Steeeve rule of thumb, if you're on a Captain Steeeve airplane and you get unruly and you're not cooperative in the back of my airplane, I'm going to find the worst place on this planet to drop you off for you, and that's where we're going to put you. And then you can figure out how you're going to get out of there to your destination. Just a heads up. But unruly passengers, there's been more and more of them these days. You better watch out, because there's a lot of federal air marshals on airplanes. Anything you do on an airplane is a federal offense. It immediately falls into that category. So there you go. All right. We've got Andox 007. Is pilot experience measured only in flying hours, or are there other factors? Also, is there any such thing for flight attendants? No, it's two different worlds. I mean, flight attendants and pilots are in the same airplane, but what they do and what we do is completely different. In terms of flying hours, yeah, you have to have a minimum amount of hours to even get looked at by an airline, but they don't evaluate all hours the same. Multi-engine time, the type of ratings that you have, whether you are military or not, all of those things kind of factor in and kind of bump you up or down as you evaluate with other pilots. Are there other factors? Yeah. One of them is extracurricular things. Are you active in your community? Who are you as a person? That's kind of what they're looking for. When I did my interview at my airline, it was about a 20-minute interview. There was 3 captains sitting there. And they didn't ask me any technical questions at all. They had my resume in front of them. They could see all of my qualifications. I think they just wanted to know, could I hold a conversation? Because I think they had already made the decision. This guy is qualified. We're going to hire him. Unless he's a total idiot and can't hold a conversation, we're going to hire him. Now, they didn't tell me that at the time, but that was the gist I got afterwards. And I got hired. So I guess the answer is I'm not a total idiot. All right. Comments below, please, from you. All right. All right. Cheryl Noel, 9888. As a pediatrician, I was called upon to provide medical care twice. At that time, about 15 years ago, the only thing they had was a stethoscope, oximeter, AED, and oxygen. No meds at all. Has this improved? Yes, it's improved vastly. There's a grab and go kit and there's a medical kit. And both of those things I've talked to doctors recently and they say they are very well stocked. And I mean, they've got one of everything. You can even sedate people. And there was a flight, at least an international flight years ago. Remember the shoe bomber, Richard Reed, that guy? He got caught trying to blow up the airplane with a bomb in his shoe. And there was a Czechoslovakian basketball team on board that basically pummeled this guy. They strapped him into a seat with duct tape and belts that they had taken off. One guy was holding on to his ponytail from behind, and a doctor went into the medical kit and got a sedative and put him out. So this guy was going to be no more threat to anybody on that airplane. You ought to see the pictures. They're an absolute riot. Okay, next is this. Colin, LYUK, all right. Can a lightning strike to a plane damage electronic instruments? Yes. The airplane is designed not to do that, but I think in the right circumstances, it could. Out at the ends of the wings and off the back fuselage of the airplane are things called static wicks. And they're little long, just like straw-looking things that come off. And they're designed, if the airplane takes an electrical strike, to dissipate the electricity off the ends of the wings. They work very well. And I have never been in an instrument strike myself. I have talked to a lot of pilots that have, and none of them lost any instrumentation on the airplane, but I'm sure it could happen. All right. Final question. All right. Holy Bead 2015 writes, I was on a passenger plane flying through a thunderstorm. It was incredibly bumpy and the airplane was struck by lightning. How dangerous is a lightning strike? Well, for the reasons I just explained, not all that dangerous. The airplanes are actually designed to take and to dissipate a lightning strike. In the right situation, could there be some damage to the airplane? I suppose. But I've been flying for 42 years. I know 36 pilots that have flown through a lightning strike. And the airplanes kept flying just fine. They went on to their destination. It was pretty much a non-event. I'm sure if you look out there on YouTube or on the internet, there are times where a lightning strike was more serious than that. But from my experience, it hasn't been all that big a deal. All right. Great questions today, folks. Keep them coming. We're going to keep looking through the comments for only the best of the best, because that's what makes it on the next episode of Ask the Captain.